23rd sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly 2013 to 2017 session took place in the Assembly Chamber at Jerningham Street, Scarborough, where Secretary of Health and Social Services, Assemblyman Claudia Groom-Duke, submitted a report of recommendations for the management of electoral district offices and proposed that the House adopt the report of the House Committee 2013 to 2017 on the allowances and other guidelines relating to the operations of the electoral district of the Tobago House of Assembly. The Chief Secretary and Secretary of Public Administration, Planning, Energy, State Lands and Information, the Honourable Orville London, moved the motion standing in his name that residents of Tobago and the other citizens of Trinidad and Tobago endorse and support the present initiative, which will ensure that Tobago's right to self-determination is finally settled.
Mr. Presiding Officer, I'd like to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas participants at recent consultations in Tobago and in Trinidad have reconfirmed their support for Tobago self-government, and whereas the present initiative of the Tobago Forum of Political Parties and the Tobago House of Assembly to adopt a unified and cohesive approach to this phase of the self-government struggle has been overwhelmingly and enthusiastically endorsed by the large and representative audience who attended the recent convention at the Signal Hill Senior Comprehensive School. And whereas the eventual success of this initiative will be especially influenced by the level of commitment, passion, and resolve displayed by the residents, the interest groups, and other organizations in Tobago. And whereas the time is long overdue to bring a satisfactory conclusion to this 4-decade-old struggle, be it resolved that this House record its firm commitment to the present process for democratic self-government initiated by the Tobago House of Assembly and the Forum of Political Parties. And be it further resolved that this House urge the residents of this island and other citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to endorse and support the present initiative, which will ensure that Tobago's right to self-determination is finally settled. The people of Tobago gave this House and gave the Forum of Political Parties. In fact, I will say the people of Tobago gave everybody who considers himself or herself a leader in Tobago in whatever sphere, they gave them a mandate to ensure that this process, this 4-decade-old journey, is finally brought to successful conclusion. This was not a situation where we had a one-off conference and we were just looking, for a show. This came after a lot of hard work, a lot of conversations, a lot of discussions, a lot of arguments, a lot of recommendations that in effect would have started 4 decades ago, but in this particular phase, over the last 4 or 5 months, what we had is a situation where there was a total of 70 meetings in Tobago and 1 in Trinidad. And the Forum of Political Parties and the Tobago House of Assembly made sure that they did things slowly, thoroughly, and well. And that is why they would have gone and they would have spoken to all the major interest groups in Tobago. Farmers, fishermen, the business community, young people, cultural groups, and the faith-based organizations, 12 of them. And then we would have gone to the various communities, gone to Roxborough, gone to Mason Hall, gone to Ravenel's at Crown Point, to make sure that everybody who was interested had an opportunity, and in many cases, 2 opportunities. Because what we expected and what in fact happened is that the people came to the first meeting and in effect were initiated into the process, had the opportunity to read the material, and then came back to the community meetings to discuss. And that is why what happened at Signal Hill on Sunday the 14th was what we could call a credible climax to a process that was open, transparent, and all-inclusive. I'm saying to the people of Tobago, I'm saying to all of those out there who believe that this is something that could affect them, their political future, to understand that this is one time that they got to put Tobago before politics. And by doing that, they're going to reach a point where the politics in Tobago will take care of itself. But I'll give you another reason, Mr. Presiding Officer, why we got to do it now. Besides the fact that we had 4 decades of labeling and so on, and finger pointing and polarization, that would have led us to this point where we just don't know what is necessary. The other fact is, Mr. Presiding Officer, that if we don't do it here, it is not going to be done in the other place. You see, Mr. Presiding Officer, we might be a law-initiating body, but we send our representatives to the law-making body in Parliament. And I want to tell the people of Tobago, our representatives in that place that we vote into power and send down to the lower house in Parliament to represent us, they have deserted us. They have betrayed us, and they prefer the destumping of their handlers in Parliament. They consider it more important than their duty to and their concern for the people of Tobago. And Mr. Presiding Officer, this is not old talk. Let me quote from the Saturday Express of the 6th of September. Hear what it says. Not London, not PNM. This is a report. Tobago barely has any representation in the lower house. I want to read that again. Tobago barely has any representation in the lower house. Vernella Allen-Toppin, the representative for Tobago East, has only contributed to 8 bill debates. Her last presentation was the Appropriation Bill 2030. So for 1 year, she traipsing down to Parliament in her high-heel shoes, standing up in Parliament, sitting down in Parliament, saying nothing. Her colleague in Tobago West, Dr. Delmon Baker, has only recorded the voices of his people in Hansard in 5 bill debates. Oh. You all remember the election? I remember seeing Baker with a mic walking up and down. When I go down to Trinidad, I go to give them fire for Tobago. I remember that. Calling people minister silence. That is Baker. 5 times. There were 500 bills debated in those 4 years. 500. Baker talked 5. Vernella talked 8. I'll come back to what they say. In the meantime, our PNM Shamfa Kojo talked 67 times. Same Tobagonian, 67 times. But you know the difference? Every time Shamfa Kojo speaks, Shamfa Kojo speaks about and for Tobago. This is the first time in the history of the Parliament that the people whom Tobagonians have elected to Parliament believe that their main priority in Parliament is to cost Tobagonians. Check it out. And I want to share with you, Mr. Presiding Officer, what our representative, I will deal with all of them, other people will deal with them. I just want to share one statement. And I want us as Tobagonians to sit down and ask ourselves, is this fair to us? This is a stranger. Because I'll tell you something that bothers me. And it really bothers me. I do a man don't get excited to it, but I want this bother. There are things which the UNC ministers are afraid to say about Tobago. That they just shook, you know, like you have a little puppy dog and you shook him. That they're shooking our Vernella Allen-Toppin and our Delmon Baker to say about Tobagonians. Because they tell themselves the best person to cause Tobagonians is Tobagonians. And we have the Tobago puppies here. Let us manipulate it. Hear what Vanilla Allen Topping says. I want Tobago to understand, and I know you are listening. So she only betraying, she bold. I know you are listening. The Member of Parliament for La Hawker Talparo, the Minister of Land and Marine Resources, is responsible. He is in fact the person responsible for all the lands in Trinidad and Tobago. What I am saying really is that the central government can give off land in Tobago, but we have not done it out of respect for the accommodation that is called the Tobago House of Assembly Act, because I cannot call it really anything but an accommodation. Mr. Presiding Officer, consider this statement coming from a Tobagonian who came to us to represent Tobago, a Tobago House of Assembly Act that everybody from Bigat, A.P.T. James, A.N.R. Robinson, every leader had fought for. We ain't get all that, but we get something. And she goes down to tell her puppet masters in Trinidad that that is an accommodation, just for them to thump the desk. Let me thump the desk now. I see what. But she has something, you know. No, she nobody else cosplaying them. But she has me Ochoy this time, eh? Ochoy Charles a quoting. Ochoy Charles say if they ain't get autonomy when they make this speech, they go into the United Nations. And here one of her colleagues, tomfoolery. That is her colleague saying that about Ochoy and what he's doing. Eh? And her colleague, Daddy used to say that tomfoolery, Mr. Speaker, and she gave more death stomping for that. Bringing in her father and she's stripping. And then she goes on. When Ochoy Charles was in charge of Tobago as Chief Secretary, and Mr. Robinson was in Trinidad as, and then she remembered that can't be right because Ochoy was not when it was Pandey. Or Mr. Pandey or whoever at the time. Correct, she said. He never asked him to come and bring internal self-government and bring more money from the national purse and more autonomy. Never. But here the part. All of a sudden, everybody is jumping all over the member for Siparia. You hear where the loyalty going on? Jumping all over. Like some people have a penchant for abusing women. And because she's a woman, some people feel they can do anything and say anything. Well, I am not going to support that. And then you know the thing they're stomping. So she gets a thing for that. And listen to the part. As much as I support autonomy for Tobago, I cannot support the abuse of women. I cannot support the abuse of the goodwill of the People's Partnership in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, the inference from that is that as far as you are concerned, autonomy for Tobago comes way down on your list. Your loyalty is not to us. None of us supports abuse for women. But I'm asking the people of Tobago, Mr. Presiding Officer, and the people of the country, is the right of Tobagonians for self-determination, is that about abuse of women? Is our legitimate right to engage in conversation and whether we're going to have a situation where we do what is necessary, whether it means that we quarrel and so on, is that abuse of women? Is that abuse of the People's Partnership of Trinidad and Tobago? And this, Mr. Presiding Officer, does not come from a Trinidad-based representative. It comes from the representative of Tobago East, whom we sent down to Trinidad, not to be a minister. None of us here was elected first to be a secretary or assistant secretary. We were selected first to represent the people, and that has to be our first responsibility and our first responsibility always.
I want to say thank you to all the people of Tobago who were there, because for me, from what I heard being there, it certainly is a privilege to have had this experience within my lifetime. And therefore, I say thanks. And what was interesting too is that it was not only Tobagonians who were there from Tobago. It was important enough for some Tobagonians who were living in Trinidad to actually come over and be a part of the history. And I know that there are naysayers out there who, for one reason or another, will criticize the numbers, the process, anything they could find to criticize. But we have to ask ourselves, 500 plus people in an island of roughly 55,000 who attend a consultation and vote unanimously on Tobago's future, where else can you find those statistics? Not even during their consultations around the town, whether it's on Tobago's consultations or even the consultation on the Trinidad and Tobago Constitution. I don't even think they saw those numbers. It was on my recent visit to Canada, on an official visit, where I was able to address an audience of about 500 persons, Trinidadians and Tobagonians. That included about 100 Tobagonians. And I had to respond to an earlier question on the separation of the islands, because it seems that this is one of the greatest concerns of persons out there, and it is creating some tension. And as I made the point that Tobago is not seeking independence, we don't want secession, all we want is greater devolution of power to deal with our own affairs and manage our own business. And with that came a resounding round of applause that one could only perceive as both clarification of a myth and support for Tobago's position. But let us look at some of the systems that were put in place. Tobago moved from a colonial administration to county council, and then to have a permanent secretary with a non-resident minister. I'm not sure that has changed much. But supposedly now, we do have a resident permanent secretary and a resident minister under the Ministry of, and a permanent and a resident minister. Today, that last reincarnation is called the Ministry of, it was called the Ministry of Tobago Affairs, Ministry of Tobago Affairs. Today, it is known as the Ministry of Tobago Development. Back then, they described the weakness of that system to have no powers. And I quote from Mr. Robinson, "They sit there making noise, but they have no power." Well, Mr. Presiding Officer, this is where I say something has changed. Because they now sit there as silent lambs and are given illegal instructions which they are dutifully carrying out to run a parallel THA and undermine the very essence of what Tobagonians say they want. This is why we must press on with urgency to achieve governing ourselves and must support those that we trust to get there. But as we speak of trust, Mr. Presiding Officer, we must always be mindful of the wolves in sheep's clothing. What do I mean? Mr. Presiding Officer, when Mr. Robinson came out in support of the Honorable Prime Minister back in 2010 and expressed confidence in her ability to deal with the tasks facing Trinidad and Tobago, I really thought he meant Trinidad and Tobago, and not just the cover term that people use called Trinidad and Tobago for Trinidad. And therefore, I am sure he must have been very disappointed on where the task of Tobago ended. I am sure even he now would agree with a new name for that famous picture of him, that he would agree if we call it the Judas hug. Because after the extensive reading that I would have done in preparation to today, and going through Mr. Robinson's motion again, yet for the umpteenth time, motion on Tobago's self-government, which I'm sure the Prime Minister and her team must have reviewed in preparation for putting forward the green paper. I cannot believe that they would not have gone through that. But I'm sure that Robinson's heart must have been broken with a feeling of being used and abused when on January 13th, 2013, and we all know that was in the midst of the election, the Prime Minister shows up on his doorstep to present him with a watered-down version of Tobago's desires. And what she would have presented to him is what we now know as the infamous green paper. The green paper that we cannot forget was supported fully by the Minister for Tobago East, the representative for Tobago East, Mrs. Toppin, the representative for Tobago West, Mr. Baker, the TOP, and even the members who have broken away from the TOP, including Mr. Anselm Richards. And so you see that, people want Tobago self-government, but they just don't want to support a process that is transparent. Mr. Presiding Officer, that is why we should not be mashing brakes now. We should be putting our feet on the accelerator and going full force, seeking Tobago's right to self-determination.
Mr. Presiding Officer, allow me to go into a few of the wishes of the people of Tobago. And the first one I want to talk about is the freedom of the Tobago administration to make laws here in Tobago. Because as I said before, real devolution is really the power to make laws, the power to establish policies that will significantly affect the lives of the people, whether it be taxes, finance, economic policies, etc. And I'm saying, who is in the best position to make laws for the people of Tobago? Who is in the best position to set policies for the people here in Tobago? And I think the Tobago House of Assembly, or any administration duly elected by the people of Tobago, is in the best position to make decisions for Tobago. Mr. Presiding Officer, the ability to borrow, to fund Tobago's development. We all know the story of the budget, where in some cases you request 10 million for a particular line item, you get 200,000. Overall, you request some $5 to $6 billion, you get 2-point-something billion. That is the reality of the story. And therefore, in this context, how is Tobago expected to fuel its development? That is another significant aspiration of the people of Tobago, Mr. Presiding Officer.
I had some situations that I've encountered recently that made me realize how much and how soon we need this autonomy to be realized for Tobago. Recently, I was in the airport. I had a booked flight during the peak season. And it seemed as though every year around the particular time you're going to encounter real jam session, delayed flights, people got upset, sent home, 3-4 flights in the one little cubby area. Our AC is insufficient, we're hot and bothered. And people are saying to me who recognize me as being part of the assembly, Mr. Beckles, do something, or do something about this. But the truth is, the Tobago House of Assembly does not have the autonomy. This is a central government issue. And so a simple thing as getting an airport to a satisfactory level is something that we would soon realize as long as we can have the autonomy to make the decisions, to set the plans we want, to make sure that our seaport and our airport are properly refurbished and manned. Mr. Presiding Officer, the situation on boards that are supposed to be responsible for Tobago's development and existence, I have constantly heard the Chief Secretaries cry for there to be more voices from Tobago on these boards. Because who can really say what my house needs better than me and those who live with me? Those of us who are feeling the grind are the ones who are able to say, this and this is what will work for Tobago. This and this is how Tobago people thinks. These are the needs. These are the things that we will consider urgent. And therefore we need to have the autonomy in order to make sure that we can realize these things, Mr. Presiding Officer.
As I stand in support of the motion, that the way forward to this, as articulated by the representative for Buku Mount Pleasant and also for Better Mount Tobin, that is important that our people get out there, wherever you are, whether the church, faith-based organizations, whether in civil society, that you get out there and get behind, because at the end of the day, they cannot ignore us if we all get together. They underestimate what's happened in this thing, because when you read the historical accounts, Mr. Presiding Officer, the same book by Susan Craig, it says one of the challenges that Tobago had in terms of the concerns rest about this pending union is that they felt that the Tobago sphere of influence to say, listen, this is what we preferred or this is what we wanted, was so limited that they could have been easily ignored. I'm saying, Mr. Presiding Officer, this government can no longer underestimate our sphere of influence, because they did that before in 2013. And the results have shown that when they underestimate the people of Tobago and our sphere of influence, that is the penalty, the price they can pay is now 12-0. Mr. Presiding Officer, in 2013, the people of Tobago led the call to say that this government was not a government that was concerned about people, and we had to show them through our ballot boxes, through our votes, that they could not operate the approach. And we did that in the THA election. Followed quickly by that in local government, Mr. Presiding Officer. This government lost 4 elections in 1 year. That started by Tobago. And I'm saying Tobagonians now have an opportunity again to show that our sphere of influence is not. So this is not about the 60,000 people who reside here, but this is about all Tobagonians everywhere. This is about Tobagonians past, Tobagonians present, and Tobagonians future, Mr. Presiding Officer.
Let me take the opportunity to thank all the contributors. I was highly impressed by the quality and the range of the contributions. And I think that all the major issues were in fact expounded in various ways, and I think anybody listening to this debate would have understood all the nuances and been in a position, I believe, to recognize that this is something that has to be done.
Thank you for joining us for the 23rd sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly 2013 to 2017 session.